Hey everyone, it's Chris, also known as Mosquito here. Glad to have you in my shop today. And what I'm going to be doing is going over how to plow a groove with a Stanley number 45 or equivalent. Doesn't have to be a Stanley. I know I've already made a video covering this, but I have since gotten a new camera that actually shoots in HD, so the quality should be much better. And I will hopefully redo the other tongue and groove video as well, and then continue on the series. So let's get a little bit more in depth and get this baby done. Okay, so what I've got here is one of my Stanley number 45s. There are quite a few different makers of these. Stanley made a couple for various groups of different manufacturers. I know Stanley made Keen Cutter, I think those were 64s. They made Craftsman series ones. They also have Record brand, there's Fulton, Sargent, I mean there's a bunch of them. So the type manufacturer really doesn't matter, but for purposes of demonstration I will be using a 45 because that is what I have most of. And the basic parts here, I took off the fence already, since we'll have to do that for setting up the grooving cutter. And they just have two wing nuts or wing screws, thumb screws on either end. Loosen those, slide it off. There's also two similar thumb screws on the top of the sliding skate. Now, for this one, I'm going to leave this on, but there are several different sizes of cutters. Here is the 1/8" cutter. It's pretty tiny. I mean, it's 1/8 inch. That you cannot use both skates, because if you do, then the width of the two skates, as you can see, is a little bit wider than the cutter, so that will not work very well. So here is a 3/8 inch cutter, which is probably the one that I'll use for demonstration, and that one can work with both skates. As you can see, it's wider than the skates, so I'm just going to tighten this down a little bit. What you want to do is make sure that the right hand side of the cutter here is flush with the skate. So just kind of make sure that that doesn't stick out too far, but definitely isn't recessed inside of the skate, because that'll cause problems when you try and get things to stop binding on you. So then you'll want to slide the other skate. I usually go just inside the cutter, just a little bit, not too much, because if you try and put it outside, just on the very outside edge, then one of the issues that you'll run into is it'll bind in the groove. Once you get down far enough, these skates will start to catch on there and just get stuck a little bit. But that's somewhat preventable by using some wax, but I usually just recess it a little bit to make it not something that I really have to worry about. So once you've got the cutter installed in the plane, as I do here, then you're going to want to make sure that you have that fence set just right, or the sliding skate set just right. And then whatever distance you want your workpiece to be is where you'll set up the fence. And as you'll see, the fence has two sets of holes here, and when I'm plowing a groove, I typically use that bottom set here. The top set would work, but as you can see, it allows you to go below the skates, which is more useful when you're using it for, well, tongue and groove, or if you're using it for a rabbit or something like that, where you need to have that cutter be overlapping the fence. So for plowing a groove, like I said, I typically use these bottom holes. And then on my fence, I have a micro adjust, which is kind of nice. If you have a plane that has one of those, it's nice to have. But the other style of fence here is the older style of fence that doesn't have that. They work just as well. You just have to get your distance set by just kind of finessing the fence just a little bit at a time, instead of trying to use the fine tune if you don't have it. So let me get this tightened on here, and then we will go over setting up the rest of it. One other thing is I am using the short rods that come with the number 45. They also come with a set of long rods. And what I typically do for deciding on which ones to use is I use the shortest ones that still allow me to get what I need to get done. So if I can get away with using the short rods, that's typically my preference, just because then I have less stuff hanging off of my plane that I might catch on myself or my bench or tools or whatever. So in this example, I'm going to be using the short rods, but if you have to plow a groove that's further in, then these long rods is what you're going to have to go with. And then there are 2 depth stops on the number 45. One of them is on this optional skate, which you might not be using depending on the width of the cutter. But this one, you have a screw that you loosen, and then this just slides up or down. And then you just tighten the screw back down whenever you're got it set to the correct depth. As you can see on this one, it's set with a decent depth. But this is the main depth adjuster, or depth stop rather. And what you do is you just loosen this screw, and then you have this little knurled nut here, and that's what adjusts up and down. So let me go ahead and get that set. I'm going to be doing a 1/4 inch deep groove for the purposes of demonstration. So I usually just take my square, and then you can kind of see the edge of the cutter there. What I'll do is I'll set it to that, since that's what's cutting. So I just butt one end up against the depth stop, and then I hold it down so it matches up with the cutter. And then you just tighten down that thumb screw again. So then, now that we have the depth set, we'll go ahead and set the fence. And I think I'm going to do 3/8 of an inch off, which I'm actually just under. So I will back the fence out a little bit. And almost perfect. So if you were going to be using the micro adjust, you just loosen the screw up here on the front, and then you can turn the screw on the side here, and you can see how that kind of moves the fence in and out. I mean, you still have it set based on these thumb screws here, so the main body of the fence isn't going to move, but it's just the rosewood and the little piece that's attached to it is what's moving. And that's really useful if you have something already marked out, or if you're trying to plow a groove or run a bead or do tongue and groove especially, and you already have one measurement already done and you need to match up to that. Having that micro adjustment is really nice. But I've done it for quite a while with the old style fence because I didn't have the micro adjust screw. It works just as well. It's just a little bit more time to get it set up, and you just kind of have to wiggle the fence a little bit, tighten it down, remeasure, and make sure everything is all set. So now that I have that set for 3/8 and I've got my depth set for roughly 1/4 of an inch, the other thing that I need to mention is there's 2 spurs. There's one on this side and then one on the optional skate. And when you're plowing a groove that is down the grain, you do not use those, because you don't want those to get caught in the grain and try and skate you off track. So when you're plowing a groove with the grain, well, anything when you're going with the grain, you don't use these knickers. Knickers or spurs is what they're usually called. And so right now I have them disengaged, but if you're doing cross grain work, you'll want to engage those or you'll have quite a bit of tear out. So everything is all set up now, so let's go on and cut the groove. Alright, so with the plane all set up, now we'll be using it to cut the groove in this board here. This is just a test piece I have set up in my workbench in my wagon vise. This is poplar. It works for hardwoods too. I've used it even in things like hard maple before. You just kind of have to adjust your cutting depth a little bit, but how I have it set up is just overhanging the bench a little bit and as parallel to the face of my bench as I can get it. just so that way when you come off the end of the board, you don't run into the bench, because that could kind of keep you from staying in a straight line on your groove. So what I have here is, as you can see, I don't have the cutter low enough yet, and that's kind of the way I usually do it, because then I can, you know, adjust my cut based on that instead of trying to, you know, set it without having the test ready. So you just loosen up the little wing nut that's on the side here. Try not to let your cutter fall out. Yeah, so there's a little wing nut here, and you just loosen that a little bit. I usually tighten it down, I don't know, hand tight. I mean, you don't want to crank on it with anything, but, and then I kind of back off just a little to the point where you can use this depth adjustment here, this little knurled knob up here, and then you just kind of advance it a little bit and then tighten it down, and then kind of do another test cut. So now you can hear I'm taking a cut. It's a pretty deep cut, but this is poplar, so that works just fine. So the technique here is I usually hold my plane about like this. I usually put my left thumb is usually on the rods here behind the knob, and then I just sort of hold it like this so I can push against the fence. So I can push that straight into the workpiece. So my left hand, I don't push forward at all. I only push into the workpiece. So I make sure that I keep this fence up against the edge of the board, because that is what determines the distance from the edge. And so if you don't keep good pressure on the fence against the workpiece, then what you're going to end up doing is probably get your groove to kind of meander towards the edge. I've done it before. It's kind of annoying. So then the right hand doesn't really have to push down at all. You're just worried about pushing forward. And then also make sure that you don't rock over. One of the things that's pretty easy to do is rock towards the fence, because then you can keep cutting or away, but that's not usually as big of an issue when you have the depth stop starting to engage. So make sure that you keep the plane straight up and down so that your groove is square. And then I usually hold it similar to how I would hold a saw, or most of my hand planes for that matter. So I just use a 4-fingered or 3-fingered grip with the thumb around, and then the pointer finger, I just go down straight towards the front. So what you want to do is start on the edge and just kind of nibble your way down. So you start at the front, and then you just kind of keep taking progressive passes to work your way towards the back. And then once you get all the way down to the end of your board, you can start to do full length passes if you have enough reach. This is a pretty short test piece, so I don't have any issues being able to get all the way across it. But if you have a longer piece, then doing the same nibbling technique, so you just kind of do a little bit of at a time and then you move back a little bit more. That works for longer pieces. It also works for shorter pieces, but it's not really necessary. The one thing to kind of keep in mind though is it's a little bit better if you go and then right before you stop, if you lift up on the back of the plane, it'll keep the bottom of it kind of clean. So that way you don't get like a shaving that just kind of breaks off in there like that. So what you want to do is just lift up the back as you're still pushing forward whenever you want to stop. And then the other thing is when you drag the plane back, lift it up just a little bit so that the front part of the skates rides in the groove, but then it'll stay in the groove, so it'll be easier to reset. But that just saves a little bit of wear on your part. So you'll just keep working your way back until the depth stop is engaged for the entire cut. And as you can hear, there's no more cutting noise going on. And so that means we're down and we're hitting this depth stop. So that means our groove is done. Okay, and the setup is exactly the same for when you're trying to plow a groove in the edge of a board. It works just the same as when you're plowing your groove in the face. I just had to adjust the fence over a little bit so you can see that I used the micro adjustment screw just because then I don't have to move the other stuff. But it's the same exact technique. Start at the end, work your way back till you hit the depth stop. So here's on the edge. And there we go. That's plowing grooves with the number 45. Thanks for checking it out.